Hey YouTubers, it's me, Lonnie Clark, Nuts for Art, Beyond Extinction Love. And I'm gonna plug away at this, and I apologize for skipping a day. I realize it's weird to make a commitment to read a book on YouTube because it doesn't really give any grace for whatever's going on in my life. I still have to read some pages for you guys no matter what. And for that, I apologize for letting my life get in the way, but I just wasn't able to read, and frankly, it's a bit of a challenge for me to get here today to do this, but I am going to do this no matter what I look like or what's going on. We're going to get through this in the next few days, so thanks for hanging in there with me, and I hope you've appreciated it. It's been an awesome book. We're on page 168, about halfway through. He's been reflecting, as you know, on his life back into being a white person, I guess. I'm going to read the last couple of sentences that we were on. So the predominant feeling was one of hopelessness and despair. The white man is not going to let you have anything, black people said. With the beginning of the freedom rides, the sit-ins, the display of heroic courage and commitment on the part of many who engaged in these activities, and with the rallying around of Martin Luther King's philosophy of nonviolence resistance, the feeling of despair began to change into hope. Someone did know. Someone did care. Even white men showed concern. White people like the Marco brothers, Father John Farage, Lillian Smith, and others had long pioneered and suffered the fury of racist resentment. Newsmen like P.D. East and other white Southerners showed that the white man who advocated in this country live up to its promises that all men are no more free than any black man. Any man who advocated justice in those days could be ruined by his white neighbors. The message did not get across to white America. Men kept thinking they were free and that these rabble-rousers were really getting what they deserved. Certainly, many who had a sense of justice did not dare show it for fear of reprisals. So no one was free, and yet most lived under the delusion that they were free. Boy, isn't that what's going on right now with the Republicans? They're all living under this fear of reprisal. We're literally aligning our country with Vladimir Putin and Russia than democracy, because the Republicans are afraid of Donald Trump's wrath. I guess it's taken to the ultimate heights. Their white supremacy is so strong they'd rather destroy democracy. Back to the book. Heaped on top of economic reprisals and the dangers of physical reprisals was perhaps the most dangerous reprisal of all, the deliberate character assassination that sprang into play the moment a man suggested that there might be equality among citizens, and this in a land where we claim equality is a good first principle. How easy was it to destroy a man's good name and reputation by suggesting that he was in some way subversive, or by calling him a communist? This got so bad that concerned people would come up to me and say, "I'd like to speak out, but if I do, my neighbors will call me a communist." It got so bad that Lillian Smith wrote, "It's high time we stopped giving the communists credit for every decent, brave, considerate, and courteous act white men might show in regards to black men." I think the general public has never understood the special kind of life that civil rights advocates had to lead in those days. Racists showed high ingenuity in developing schemes to destroy a man's reputation as a means of nullifying his work. For example, many civil rights advocates, white and black, traveled and lectured extensively. In those days, the number of effective men were entrapped in situations that either damaged them personally or ruined their reputations. Those who were with lecture bureaus were particularly vulnerable. Anyone could write the lecture bureau for the travel schedule of its speaker. If a man made a long flight to fulfill a speaking engagement, the chances were at least fair that when he landed at the distant airport, he might make use of the restroom. It would be enough to plant one or two men in the restroom and accuse him of some indecency. This happened to a Mississippi white attorney in a case that was given maximum publicity in a white newspaper. He had to fly to Los Angeles for an appearance. His travel schedule was known. At the end of this flight, he went to use the men's restroom, and when he emerged, he was arrested because two men claimed he had indecently exposed himself. He was tried in absentia and found guilty in Mississippi. He was publicly labeled a pervert, and his career in civil rights was effectively quashed. Priests openly involved in civil rights advocacy were menaced with rumors that they were immorally involved with women. An Oklahoma priest told me that one day after Mass, when he had given a communion to a lady, she met him at the door of the church, gave him a hate stare, and said, "How's your woman, Father?" Priests are accustomed to being called by people in all kinds of distress. Another priest in the South told me a lady called him in distress because she could not understand a certain passage from Scripture and wanted him to come right over and discuss it with him. He let her come, but when she made advances, he repudiated her and sent her away, fearing it was a scheme of racists to throw a woman rap at him. When Father John Cofield became a public figure because he went into voluntary exile from his diocese in protest against the racial injustices condoned there, he was accepted into the Chicago Archdiocese. Sorry, I can't get that word, you guys. We feared that he would be victimized by character assassinations, perhaps even entrapped in this kind of woman rap. I went to Chicago to brief him on the precautions he must now take that he stood as a symbol for civil rights, warning him that he must not be alone with any woman, that he must always be able to account for his time so that no one would say that at such and such a time and at such and such a place. He and his host priests were quite dumbfounded. When I saw that they were not really going to believe that men would go to such lengths to vilify Father Cofield, I called Dick Gregory, who happened to be at his home in Chicago. I told him my situation and said I felt Father Cofield would believe him if he would come right over and add his warnings to mine. He came to the rectory, and we sat up and talked with the priests until 6 a.m. He, of course, knew about Father Cofield. He had heard the same rumors I had heard, that Father Cofield might be subjected to character assassination. Dick Gregory had already telephoned Chicago city officials and told them that if there were any attempts on the part of any racist group to smear Father Cofield, Chicago's black citizens would block every freeway leading into the city and tie up Chicago until Father's name was cleared. We discussed this problem of character assassination and entrapment with Dr. King and Dick Gregory and Whitney Young and other men active in civil rights. We were advised by a black man in the government to take precautions. We should keep our travel schedules secret. We should avoid using public restrooms unless some reliable person accompanied us to serve as a witness in the event that some plant might accuse us of some immoral act or gesture. We were advised never to get maneuvered into a situation where we were alone with any lady we did not know. In the bad days, we were even advised to find some pretext of changing our hotel room as soon as we registered. Civil rights workers risked being harassed in their hotel rooms. One minister, shortly after arriving at his hotel room, answered a knock at his door and was beaten unconscious by two men wielding baseball bats. In my own case, If I stayed more than 3 days in any large city, I usually tried to change hotels or else move in with some black family. In one city in Louisiana, where I lectured, I could not stay in the city because all the lodging places had been threatened with bombings if they accepted me as a guest. Wow, this was 1960, you guys. This kind of thing continued throughout the early and mid-60s. We led strange, hidden lives. We were advocating only one thing, that this country rid itself of racism that prevented some citizens from living as fully functioning men, and as a result dehumanized all men. We were advocating only that this country live up to its promise to all its citizens. But since racism always hides under a respectable guise, usually the guise of patriotism and religion, a great many people loathed us for knocking holes in these respectable guises. It was clear that we would have to live always under threat. When we would get together with Dick Gregory, Martin Luther King, Sarah Patton Boyle, P.D. East, or any of the hundreds or more or less public advocates of civil rights, we compared notes and discussed this. One thing was clear. We had to accept the fact that these principles were worth dying for, and that there were plenty of people who were willing to see us disappear. In 1 year, we lost 7 friends and a colleague in death, of whom one died of natural death. The others were killed. Dr. King and Dick Gregory became almost fatalistic in accepting the fact that they were dead men, and that it was only a matter of time before that fact became a reality. No kidding. They and many, many others acted with bravery and heroism, almost incomprehensible to most men. They went into areas of extreme danger. This is possible occasionally, but it is almost impossible to keep it up. The human nervous system will not stand it. I got a glimpse of it close one day in Chicago when we learned that a black man had been found murdered in a town called Libertyville in Mississippi. In those days, you could only get an official version of such events. No black person would talk to you long distance for fear the operator was listening and would report the call. So the official version simply said that the victim, Mr. Lewis Allen, had been found shot, but since he had not been involved in civil rights, it was apparently just an ordinary killing. We did not believe it, so we decided to go there and see what black people had to say about this. In those days, we worked such trips this way. We would fly to a nearby city, either Memphis or New Orleans. A Mississippi car driven by black people would pick us up and drive us to the area of trouble. We would get our answer as rapidly as possible and be gone. But even as we were making our arrangements, the nervousness overwhelmed us. There was some flaw in the planning. We called our contact again from the airport in Chicago. Dick Gregory wanted to make sure the pickup car would have somebody he knew. I heard him shout into the phone, I'm not going in this car with anybody unless I know who he is. By then, we were both trembling. We were shaken with tremors of pure fear. When I mentioned this to Dick Gregory, he mumbled, "That's what I call knee-knocking courage." I suppose almost everyone in that kind of work had to learn a simple technique to make our wills say yes when our bodies and our nervous systems said no. It is possible to go to places and to function even when you're frightened. We discovered, incidentally, that although Mr. Allen was not involved in civil rights, as the officials stated, though there was a good reason for getting killed, He had had a misfortune to witness a white man's attack on a black man and had been forced to testify to that in a court hearing the Wednesday before the Saturday on which he was found shot. In a sense, we led absurd lives in those days of terrible tensions. We formed a loose kind of confederation without organization, exchanging information, helping one another. I deliberately did not belong to any organization. All of us, blacks and whites, were more or less in touch with one another and at the same time pretty independent. If something occurred in an area where one of us might be, particularly if it involved an injustice done to a black man, whichever of us was closest to it tried to find out what really happened and tried to help if possible. Because the Klan and Klan sympathizers were strong, we often stayed in the homes of brave black people. Often when I was doing investigatory work in the South, I would travel with my old friend P.D. East, the white editor of the Pedal paper, one of the heroes of the early resistance to racism in the Southland. He was a comic genius who worked effectively by ridiculing the racists. He was broke, harassed, and impoverished because of this. But even in tragedy, he was irresistibly funny. One day, we were driving through a particularly disturbed area of the South where the Klan was strong. We were very nervous for fear someone would recognize us. In those days, strange things happened. Police cars, for example, would simply get behind you and trail you so that you did not dare call on the person you intended to see for fear he would receive reprisals later. Filling stations, service stations were particularly adept at spotting suspicious persons and reporting them to the police or the highway patrol. The police could stop you on any pretense. You were going too fast or you had broken some law and question and harass you. Since so many of the lawmen were racist, it could be a nerve-wracking experience. I forget where we were going that day, but we were driving through a beautiful forest on a good highway, and I heard PD begin to curse under his breath. We were driving very carefully so as not to attract attention. I looked back and saw a police car, or perhaps a highway patrol car. In a moment, the car began to flash its dome flasher. We had to stop. "Let me do the talking," PD growled. "I won't open my mouth," I said. We waited, almost paralyzed with fright. Both of us were extremely hated in that particular area. The officer approached the window of the car and asked PD where we were going. In a voice of humble cordiality, PD gave him some response. The officer replied with greater warmth, said we had made a turn back there without flashing the turning lights. Relieved that he apparently did not recognize us, we began testing the turning lights and found one of them did not work. He said he would not give us a ticket, but that we should get it fixed at the next stop. PD thanked him profusely and we drove down the highway, watching in the rearview mirror to see that the patrol car was not following. It turned and headed in the opposite direction, and both of us heaved huge sighs of loud and profound relief. "That was a close one, Griffin," PD said. "Did you see how cool I was handling him?" PD asked in his brashly voice, almost in a contrast to his mild and meek manner with the officer. "You were great, PD," I said. "Let's hurry up and get out of this part of the country. The next one might recognize us." He accelerated slightly and we drove on in silence as we watched the tall trees flash past the car windows. Suddenly, PD exploded. "Why, that ignorant son of a bitch! That insulting, ignorant son of a bitch!" "What are you talking about, PD?" I asked. Do you realize that ignorant bastard didn't even recognize us? Hell, Griffin, we're famous, and he didn't even recognize us. I'm insulted. You'd better thank God he didn't. Well, I do thank God he didn't, PD said, but it doesn't make it any less insulting. In spite of everything, however, those days of the early and mid-60s were full of hope. The country seemed to be awakening to the depth of injustices suffered by black people. Hundreds of college students, white and black, poured into the black areas to register black citizens to vote. In the areas of the South, students on campus were deeply concerned and picketed local businesses that continued to practice discrimination. The world watched and mourned the bombings at Birmingham. The world watched, outraged and inspired by the events at Selma, enthralled by the Washington March. A major civil rights bill was passed in 1964, and if it was controversial, it at least nullified a lot of discriminatory ordinances. And I am going to stop here. We're at page 175, near the bottom of the page. And I think the next reading, who knows? We've got to get to 200, and we're at 175. I think that's going to be a couple more readings. I seem to get like 6 or 8 pages in a day. Anyways, you guys, I will be back. Who knows what I'm going to look like tomorrow? Who knows what's going to happen? But I'm definitely going to come back and finish this up. So put your courage feet on. We definitely need it.